Recognize this? Ah, yes, Lincoln Center, a cornerstone of New York City, an internationally renowned cultural institution known for its world-class programming, iconic fountain, and open plaza. Alright, now how about this? Drawing a blank? Well, probably because this is the lesser-known community who lived in the neighborhood that was bulldozed in the so-called name of New York City's progress. A community whose needs were ignored and disregarded so that modernist development and high culture could rescue the ever-desperate, depressed community that had been so terribly damaged by a plight of blight and slums. A damaged community that just so happened to be one of the most integrated neighborhoods in all of America during the time, built on generations of families that had long-standing businesses and tight-knit livelihoods. A community so damaged that they banded together and uniformly stood up for their neighborhood in the face of the powerful forces of urban renewal, protecting their homes against the bulldozer for an additional 2 years after the project was proposed. This is the grassroots story of Lincoln Center, one that spotlights community resilience opposed to the injustices forced upon them. A blend of culture and people, Lincoln Square was located in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It was better known to residents as the San Juan Hill neighborhood, which was named after its growing Puerto Rican population. It was home to over 7,000 families and around 800 businesses. Its expansive patchwork of row houses, mom-and-pop shops, and places of worship formed a community woven tightly together over generations. This neighborhood was also home to vibrant cultural richness and diversity, as it contained many jazz bars and clubs. San Juan Hill was even home to jazz icon Thelonious Monk, a legendary pianist, where he performed at numerous establishments in the area. However, the mainstream story of decline in this neighborhood was in part accurate. There had been no new construction or investment in the neighborhood for a decent period, due to the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation redlining the area. This contributed to the area's reputation for being a blighted, economically disadvantaged part of the city, a perception that made it a prime target for urban renewal efforts, despite the vibrancy and community that existed within its borders.
Duly ushered in the first stage of a remarkable project, the culmination of 3 years of planning to give New York and the whole American nation a great center of the performing arts, the like of which the world has never seen.
Lincoln City planners and profit-driven developers viewed the so-called blighted neighborhood as ideal for redevelopment, legalized by the 1949 Housing Act's Title I provision, which funded slum clearance and urban redevelopment. Though initially intended to improve housing and address urban decay, the program evolved to benefit wealthy developers and property owners, enabling large-scale land clearance for commercial use. This shift also gave professional planners significant control over city development, paving the way for powerful figures like Robert Moses, who we'll explore later. The Lincoln Square Urban Renewal Project aimed to replace existing homes and businesses with a modernist redevelopment that would drive cultural and economic growth. Central to the plan was Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, home to the Metropolitan Opera, New York City Ballet, and Juilliard School of Music, positioning New York as a cultural capital. The broader vision also included high-rise apartments, offices, Fordham University, and retail spaces to replace the area's so-called blighted tenement housing. Robert Moses, a powerful urban planner and key figure behind Lincoln Square's redevelopment, was often seen as the main opponent to preserving the area. Over his 40-year unelected public career, he leveraged government tools like issuing bonds with minimal oversight to fund large-scale and personal projects. As head of the New York City Committee's on slum clearance, he focused on securing sponsors by framing Lincoln Square as a blighted area in need of cultural renewal. To aid in creating the perception of blighted Lincoln Square, Moses produced brochures that contrasted images of substandard living with bold, professional-looking excerpts that contained large amounts of seemingly objective data. The people that lived in Lincoln Square were a mere afterthought in his brochure, and their existence was not as pertinent to the area as was the harmful slum conditions that so-called needed replaced. To secure funding, Moses framed the Urban Renewal Project as one that positioned New York City as a cultural leader and boosted America's post-Cold War image. John D. Rockefeller III, his main sponsor, supported the societal need for arts promotion, and his backing helped attract $185 million in additional sponsorship. However, support and enthusiasm were not shared by the opinions of those who should have mattered most in this project, Lincoln Square's residents. Although Moses had first conceived Lincoln Square plans in 1954, the demolition and construction did not begin until 1959, a setback significantly influenced by the pushback from community members. The resistance hoped to turn back the city's bulldozers, save their homes and businesses, and ultimately force the city to rethink its slum clearance policies. Even though their campaign did not produce the results they were aiming for, Lincoln Square residents left a bigger mark than they likely imagined. It contributed to a rising citywide opposition to urban renewal by introducing a new vocabulary, one that framed the consequences of renewal as not just of the demolition of houses, but as the erasure of an entire urban ecosystem. When it began in 1955, the Lincoln Square campaign focused on preserving individual homes from demolition. By the end of the decade, it had helped structure a loosely organized movement against urban renewal and helped develop an emerging urban philosophy that was devoted to the preserving of a complex web of worthy social life. In mid-1955, two neighborhood groups, the Lincoln Square Residents Committee and the Lincoln Square Businessmen's Committee, began organizing resistance against the urban renewal project. The leadership of the Residents Committee was notably shaped by women, who took charge in defending their homes while also challenging traditional gender roles. These women, along with other members, were part of the more stable and established demographic of the neighborhood, including homeowners, longtime renters, and small business owners. The group was primarily composed of white Anglo-European residents with some representation from the growing Puerto Rican population. Initially advocating for fairer relocation practices and the construction of low-cost housing, their efforts included gathering 1,800 signatures, petitioning Mayor Robert Wagner and the City Council, and attempting to meet with prominent stakeholders like John D. Rockefeller, though they were unsuccessful in securing meetings. The committees needed assistance in voicing their concerns to a larger and more influential audience. To aid in the efforts, the committees sought out Harris Present, a liberal lawyer and advocate. As a seasoned housing activist who worked with the Spanish American Youth Bureau, Present brought legal precision and moral clarity to their cause. While residents marched and recruited more people, Present strategized. He wrote numerous op-eds in the New York Times and exposed the failures of New York's relocation policies that displaced thousands. He bridged the gap between grassroots defiance and official discourse, arguing not just for better housing, but for a broader vision of what community meant. Beginning in 1957, protesters started to abandon their original demands of decent relocation and advocated instead to defeat the project altogether. Present brought this narrative to life by shifting the opinion on Lincoln Square from slums to neighborhoods, from decay to a culture worth preserving. The commission hearings were utilized greatly by the resistance as a vehicle to make their concerns and opinions heard. On many occasions, they sent pickets to City Hall for several preliminary hearings and would hire a sound truck to go through the neighborhood the day before each hearing, urging residents to travel downtown and voice their opposition. As many as 50 protesters, many of whom were women and children, would appear at each hearing, carrying signs that read, "Humane progress means decent relocation," "Shelter before culture," and "No homes, no culture." Their fight to preserve their homes came to a climactic moment on September 11, 1957, when the Lincoln Square redevelopment plan was brought to the Board of Estimate and City Planning Committee for a final vote of approval. Their hearing stretched nearly 11 hours, featuring 36 speakers against the project and 24 in favor. A major concern was the project's racial impact, and testimonies drew parallels to historical displacement of marginalized communities, framing the redevelopment as unjust and racially harmful. Most importantly, the hearings allowed the community to articulate a deeper critique of the project. Present and others argued that the true culture and progress weren't just about the elite institutions like Lincoln Center, but also about preserving the rich, interconnected life of a diverse working-class neighborhood. They challenged the idea that high culture was more valuable than everyday human relationships and stability. The residents spoke out about the value of their homes, businesses, and community networks, redefining culture as the lived experience of a neighborhood, not just art institutions. The resistance posed a powerful question: what kind of culture and whose lives should a city truly support and protect? For many, Lincoln Center became a symbol of loss, as its open plaza represented the erasure of a thriving neighborhood culture dismissed by urban renewal. Their calls to protect their livelihoods were made, and ultimately ignored. Despite powerful resistance from Lincoln Square residents and small business owners, the City Planning Commission and the Board of Estimate ultimately approved the Lincoln Center project. Officials, swayed by promises from Robert Moses and John D. Rockefeller that displaced residents would be relocated decently, deemed the project too important for New York's urban renewal goals to delay any further. The project received unanimous approval. Lawyer Harris Present later felt that the official hearings felt like mere formalities, that the decision had already been made behind closed doors. Facing a coalition of elite power brokers, major institutions, and a media landscape largely in favor of the project, the grassroots opposition simply couldn't compete on that level. Yet the legacy of Lincoln Square's resistance was significant. The protesters helped shift the conversation around urban renewal, pushing the debate beyond logistical questions of relocation and exposing the deeper consequences of top-down planning, especially with the destruction of working-class, racially diverse communities. Their vision of a neighborhood-based, human-centered urban culture challenged the dominant narrative that grand cultural projects were inherently good for the city. Though they lost the immediate battle, the residents' struggle planted seeds for future resistance. Their campaign helped lay the groundwork for a broader movement that would later call into question the very foundations of urban renewal policy. Ultimately, Lincoln Square became both a cautionary tale and a turning point, showing that the fight for community voice and neighborhood integrity could shape the future of city planning.